This is a very easy grammar question. Which of the following options contains only grammatically correct sentences? The reason I am saying it's easy is that the errors are pretty easy to spot. But of course, you need to know these rules in order for you to spot these errors. The first sentence says, there are less cars on the road today. Now, what we have to remember is that this word less is used for uncountable nouns. Uncountable means you cannot assign a number to it. But if I am talking about something countable like cars, because I can say 1 car, 2 cars, then I should use the word few or fewer. And that is why the first sentence is in fact not correct. So this cannot be part of my answer. That means that I can cancel out the first option. I can also cancel out the third option. The second one has a comparison. The rule that we follow is that we compare similar things. So when I say she is nicer than her sister, I am comparing she, who is a person, with her sister. Both are people and this comparison is absolutely correct. So I do want to include B in my answer. This is right. Now let's look at C. I have been here from Monday. The first thing that we might notice is that we are using the present perfect tense, which is have been. Whenever we use the present perfect tense or we use the present perfect continuous tense to refer to the fact that something started in the past and continues up to the present time, we normally use a since, not a from. So, this word should be replaced with since. That means that C cannot be part of our answer. Now, if C is not part of the answer, then I can happily eliminate option 4 as well. D is correct. I know how to swim is fine. You could also say I know to swim. That is also fine. No problem with D. E says she's the girl that won the case competition. Now, you have to notice that girl obviously is a person. After that, when I use the word that to refer to girl, that is what we call a relative pronoun. So whenever we use a relative pronoun to refer to a person, most of the times we are going to use who. Alright. So clearly there's something wrong with E. E cannot be part of our answer. Now, if that is the case, then I have already found my answer. But let's look at F because it's there. The media are divided on the issue. I know that for us it sounds weird to say that the media are divided, but then media can be singular or plural, just like data can be singular or plural depending on what you're trying to say. So here we could also be referring to different media or different types of media, in which case R is justified, which means that F is not entirely incorrect. So our answer is going to be option 5, B, D, F. Here we have a grammar question and we have to figure out which of the following options contains grammatically correct sentences. Now, a lot of this question depends on your understanding of prepositions. So if you're not very sure of your prepositions, then you may not get this right. But on the whole, I don't think it's a very difficult question. Just try and remember these rules. A says, the dean asked for additional funding. When you ask for something, you request it or you seek permission for it. So, ask for is absolutely right. Nothing wrong with A. B says, the boss discussed about the new project with his team. What I want you to know is that discuss is not followed by about. We discuss something. So B, therefore, should not be part of our answer. If B is not part of our answer, then it cannot be option 2, it cannot be option 3, it cannot be option 5. Life is very simple. C says, Radhika is good in data interpretation. So here, we are not supposed to be saying good in, we are supposed to be saying good at. So please remember this, we are good at or we are bad at something. So for example, I am good at verbal but I am bad at math. So C cannot be part of our answer. Now if C is not part of our answer, then we kind of know the answer, right? It should therefore be option 4. But we still have 3 more sentences to go. Neil is transitioning into a new phase of life. You transition into something. That is absolutely right. So, D can be a part of our answer. E says, Rajat emphasized on the need for consistency in XAT preparation. Emphasized on. After emphasize, we do not use on. We emphasize something, just like we discuss something. So, E also is incorrect. F says this car is superior to the previous one. So, when I say superior to, this is absolutely right. In fact, we also would have said inferior to. One thing is superior to or inferior to another. So, nothing wrong with F, which means our answer is going to be option 4, ADF. This is a fill in the blanks question. The good part about this question is that the words are not very difficult. So, if you just understand the paragraph and you use a little bit of logic, I think this question is pretty simple. Now, what we're going to do is that we're going to read the paragraph. We will try and use the clues in the paragraph to eliminate options as fast as we can. Let's look at the first blank. When each blank generation grows up, it looks down on the next as if we all forget what it feels like to be. Now, for the first blank, it's a little weird for us to say when each old generation grows up, because if you're old, then you don't have to grow up. So, as far as I can see, it definitely cannot be the third option. The rest of it could be. Now, let's look at the fourth one. When each preceding generation grows up. Preceding means just the one before. Could be, although I'm a little suspicious about this, but I can definitely eliminate option 3 at this juncture. Let's now move on to the second blank. This is very, very helpful. We all forget what it feels like to be. Obviously, this will have to refer to being young. So now let's look at the second word for each option. It could be young. So first option is okay. Option 2 says next. What it feels like to be next does not make any sense. So we can eliminate option 2. The fourth one says succeeding. What it feels like to be succeeding, we are just trying to say that, we forget what it was like when we were younger. So probably not the fourth one. Now we still have 2 options left, 1 and 5. For that, we didn't have to work very hard. Let's keep going. When most blank think about their own youthful indiscretions. Now, this is a word that you may not know, but that's okay. You don't need to know it. In the next sentence, we are probably talking about people who are grown up and them thinking back to the time that they were young. So, for the third blank, I definitely want to say old people or something like that. But in any case, let's try to look at this word indiscretion. Indiscretion is behavior that is careless or that shows lack of good judgment. Now, there's another word in this paragraph which will come later on. So, I'll explain it to you when we approach that word. So, the third blank now, can it be seniors? Could be. So, option 1 could work. The fifth one says adults. Could also work. So, let's keep going to the third blank. It says, but when the same people think about those in today's generation doing something similar, they blank sound the alarm about a decline in morality in the next generation. Now, you have to understand what is being said here. When we think about all the careless things that we did when we were young, we say, oh, you have to let it go, everyone does it. So, we don't pay too much attention to that. But when the same thing is done by the younger generation, then we start taking it very seriously. We sound the alarm about decline in morality. So what does this show? This shows that we have double standards. The way that we look at our own behavior is very different from the way that we look at others' behaviors. And that is why the next word, hypocritical, becomes very, very important. Hypocritical means that you're contradicting what you seem to feel or believe. If you believe that the younger generation has somewhat inferior morals because of the way that they are behaving, then you probably also had somewhat inferior morals because you behaved the same way. But you can't say that, oh, I was superior to these people, but it's okay if I made a few mistakes. That is what hypocrisy is. It is to have different standards of judgment for yourself and for other people, which is exactly what we are doing. And that is why between the first and the fifth option, we need to pick fifth. Also because in the last blank, we want to use a negative word. We want to say that we have a slightly different view of ourselves and a different view of others. So it cannot be carefully. Carefully is something good. It's a positive word. But we want to use something negative. So even if you don't quite understand what hypocritically means, you should still eliminate option 1. So the answer here is going to be option 5. Now here we are looking at a parajumble. Normally, parajumbles with options are not very complicated. I enjoyed doing this because it's a little deceptive. So if you're not on your toes, then you might end up marking the wrong answer. It's not difficult. It just means that you need to be a little more careful. So let's look at A. We're going to use the sort link sequence to figure out our starter and follower. But of course, we'll work with the options as far as possible. Whatever that might be on Europa, far from the sun, beneath kilometers of ice, it will not be sunlight. So when I say whatever that might be, there's clearly a reference to some other sentence. So this is a follower. Now I'm not sure which sentence yet because I haven't read the others. So let's go to B. The final ingredient for a habitable world is a source of energy for life to exploit. Now when it says final ingredient, I thought, okay, this looks like a follower. I mean, there is nothing else, no pronouns, no transition words, but normally before this I would have said what are the other ingredients. So it looks like a follower, but I'm not very sure. Look at C. On Earth, almost every living thing ultimately depends on photosynthesis for its energy, including the rich ecosystems in the ocean depths discovered in the 1980s and which helped the idea of life on Europa gain a foothold. Now, this actually did look like it was a starter because it seems to be introducing how organisms function on Earth. But you still have to understand what this sentence is saying. That photosynthesis does not always require sunlight because it can happen in the ocean depths also. So, I would say this may be the starter. D says their inhabitants do not benefit from sunlight directly. Now, this is the sentence where you really need to focus because I had to keep searching for the reference for their inhabitants. See, you might feel that this refers to Europa, but Europa is singular. So, I would have said its inhabitants. So, this does have a grammatical angle here. When I say their, I am clearly referring to something plural. So, if you really search this paragraph, you will realize their refers to the rich ecosystems in the ocean depths. That's the only thing it could refer to. There is no other point of reference. So, we have found our first link. It should be C and D. Now, if you don't find this link, then it is very likely that you'll head off in a completely different direction and say that C is probably the starter. But the moment you figure out the CD link, then you are heading towards the right answer. Now, look at E. That is a bit of a problem. Clearly, this is a follower. What is a bit of a problem? So now, let's take a look at our options. 1 does not have the CD link, so I can cancel it out. The second does not have a CD link, so I can cancel it out. Third does not have a CD link, so you can figure it out by now. The fourth one also does not have a CD link. So, surprisingly, I go to the fifth option. Now, the only thing I now need to figure out is, does it make sense? Because B did not look like a starter, right? I thought C is the starter. But now, consider. I can start with B. I have introduced the idea that a source of energy is necessary in a habitable world. After that, if I go to A, whatever that might be refers to a source of energy. That can work. So, there does seem to be a BA link. After that, I put E. That is a bit of a problem. After this, I'll have to explain what the problem is, pretty much. So, after E, if I put C, it explains the problem. Because on Earth, every living thing depends on photosynthesis for its energy. After C, I put D. Their inhabitants do not benefit from sunlight directly. So now I'm explaining what the problem is, that on Earth, there are certain creatures that do not benefit from sunlight directly. So as of now, this sequence seems to make a bit of sense, even though this is not the sequence that I would have picked at the beginning. As I said, slightly deceptive question. The most critical link to form is the CD link. So please pay attention to these words, their, his, its, all of these possessive pronouns or adjectives. Let's take a look at our answer. Option 5 can now be confirmed. Now here we have an interesting question. There is a cartoon and we are supposed to figure out the underlying message. The cartoon has a boy and his dog. The boy is saying, I love how he finds joy in the simple things. So the boy is thinking, hey, the dog has a great life. The dog is chasing the ball and his life is fantastic. That's all he cares about. The dog is saying, the emotional burden of alleviating his depression is crushing me. So is the dog actually enjoying his life? No. The dog feels that there are a lot of problems in his life. So the message seems to be that the boy is not able to interpret the dog's situation appropriately. He is going by what seems to be true, but the reality is something different. So that's my understanding. Now, if you have the same understanding, I think you can get to the answer. Let's look at 1. Love is about caring for others even if it wears you out. Now, this refers only to the dog, but not to the boy. So, 1 does not capture the underlying message for the entire picture. It perhaps just captures the mentality of the dog because the dog is working so hard to keep the boy happy. So, maybe not 1. Option 2 says our sense of duty for others can overwhelm our sense of self. Now, this also seems to be referring only to the dog. The dog says that I am overwhelmed by this duty that I have to perform, but it doesn't capture the dog's point of view. So, this explains only half of the picture, which is why option 2 is not the right choice. The third one, our interpretation of others' reality is mostly arbitrary. This kind of makes sense because now I am capturing the boy's perspective versus what the dog is thinking. So our interpretation of others' reality is not entirely accurate. So I like 3. The fourth one says our sense of identity is based on how others interpret us. Now here we are not referring to a misunderstanding, which is what the picture is all about. Also, we are not saying that the dog's identity is defined by what the boy thinks. It's more that the dog's reality is different from what the boy believes it to be. So it cannot be the fourth one. The fifth one says our understanding of others based on our beliefs may not be true. Now we have 2 options to work with, and if you follow some very basic thumb rules, I think you can find your way to the answer in all such situations. Look for options which are less definitive. Look for options that do not have extreme words. At least for me, this really worked in this test. The third one says mostly arbitrary. Arbitrary means random. So is the boy's interpretation random? And can we justify the word mostly? That we cannot say because this is just one situation. So because of this, I would now say option 3 is not that great. Option 5 is better because it's slightly more tentative. And so option 5 is the correct choice. This looks like a really great question because the paragraph is short. But there is a word here that you might want to pay attention to. The paragraph is saying employees complaining about mundane tasks are often ignored. The first word that might trouble you is the word mundane. Now, what does mundane mean? It means dull or boring. So, these employees are ignored by the organization. Why are they ignored? Because they continue to produce good results. So, even though there is a listlessness means laziness, lack of enthusiasm. So even though their energy declines, these employees continue to produce good results, but it is not because they are putting in a lot of work. It is because the tasks are repetitive and the outcomes are expected. It's kind of on autopilot that they keep producing these results. So now, my understanding is that we are talking about bored employees. We are talking about how these bored employees continue to produce good results, and because of that, the organization does not really pay too much attention to them. Let's keep that in mind. Our first option says, listlessness settles around good performers who are bored. Now, as far as I can see, this seems to have all the key words: listlessness, good performers who are bored. But at the same time, this does not take into account how the organization does not pay attention to these employees. So, option 1, not entirely complete. The second one, a bored employee must be a bad performer. Let's stop here. They continue to produce good results is what the paragraph says. So, a bored employee must be a bad performer definitely is not right. The third one says boredom is a serious problem that needs immediate attention. This seems to be a little too alarmist. We are not saying it needs immediate attention. We are just saying, hey, the organization needs to pay attention, but not necessarily immediate attention. So, option 3 is out. The fourth one says, good performance makes organizations overlook their employees' state of mind. This talks about employee state of mind, which is what? Listless. They are lacking energy. They are bored. Good performance is obviously referred to, and because they deliver good performance, the organization does not take their problem seriously. So, option 4 could be the answer. But then, look at 5. Option 5 says, mundane tasks create listlessness around good performers. Now, there are two ways we can approach this. One is to say that this seems to have all the relevant keywords: mundane, listless, good performers. So, it seems like it could be the answer. But then, look at it carefully and evaluate the meaning. Are we trying to say that in general, good performers are faced with mundane tasks and therefore are listless? No, we're not trying to generalize this for all good performers, which is what option 5 seems to suggest, that in general, good performers have mundane or boring tasks and therefore they become lethargic. So, on that basis, maybe we can eliminate 5. There's another reason, however, that I would eliminate it. See, the very first sentence says employees complaining about mundane tasks are often ignored. What does that mean? It means that the organization does not pay attention to their complaints. Option 5 does not really talk about that at all. It just captures the rest of the message without the organization's response coming into the picture. So, option 5 therefore is not the right answer. The right choice seems to be option 4. But for this question, you do need to understand the message that the author is trying to deliver instead of just picking up random keywords and trying to put them together in the answer. Here we have a pretty interesting parajumble. We do have options, but we still use the sort link sequence. The first option says the treaty tests of a budget deficit no bigger than 3% of the GDP and a public debt converging towards a ceiling of 60% of a GDP seemed impossible for Italy to pass by 1999. What this is saying is that a treaty required Italy to conform to certain standards, but Italy was not likely to meet those standards. So, overall, I know that this is a follower because what treaty are we talking about? When I say the treaty, I should have mentioned it earlier. B says that Belgium also had a public debt above 100% of GDP helped as did a special Euro tax Mr. Prodi introduced. So, here definitely a follower because when I say it also helped, I must have mentioned helped what? So, follower. C also looks like a follower. Into the uncompromising environment came the first of a series of external shocks. So, it seems that I should have talked about an uncompromising environment before this. So, I would say this also looks like a follower. D says, but when it became clear in 1997 that Spain was determined to join from the start, Romano Prodi, the Italian Prime Minister, decided that Italy as a founder member of the bloc must be there too. Now, the moment we read these dates, 1999 in C, 97 in D and 92 in E, we might start thinking that there is a chronological order. But you need to be careful whenever you think that there is a chronology there. Pay attention to the other clues because that chronology could be disrupted if there are other logical clues that you are supposed to attend to. What would I pay attention to in D? First of all, I know it is a follower because it starts with but. Another very important thing. Here we have the full name and here we have a shorter version of the same name. We know that shorter names have to be put after the full names are put. So that means that D has to appear somewhere before B. Not immediately, but definitely somewhere before it. Let's look at E. Germany had more or less designed the 1992 Maastricht Treaty's convergence criteria to keep out a profligate, chronically indebted Italy. Now, this actually looked like the starter for me when I read it the first time, but The other thing that I realized is that when I say the Maastricht Treaty, the treaty in A obviously refers to this, it can't refer to anything else. So I found my first link. It is going to be E and A. So I didn't bother with what the starter is, because the starter honestly is very difficult to figure out here. Now a lot of us will look at the options and say there are two options starting with C, so C must be the starter. And I would not go against that logic. I mean, it could work in a lot of cases, but in any case, we have D being preceded by B, or at least appearing somewhere before B, and we have the EA link. So we're going to use both of these clues to decide. Look at one, it has the EA link, but it does not have D before B. So that is why option 1 cannot be our answer. The second option has D before B and it also has the EA link. So this looks like it could work. Third option has the EA link, but it does not place D before B. So this is not going to be our answer. Option 4 does not have the EA link. So this is out. Option 5 does not have the EA link. It also does not place D before B. So option 5 is out. So that clearly means that I have found my answer, which is option 2. Now here we have a paragraph followed by a single question. Which of the following options can be best inferred from the passage? This paragraph is a bit abstract, so what I would do is that I would focus on the main point that the author is trying to make before I look at the options. What is the main point? The lovely thing about the unsayable is that it is unsaid. So we're trying to say that sometimes not saying things is a good thing. After that, we start talking about art. Art exists so that the unsayable can be said without having to actually say it. This, in fact, is a significant point. We are talking about art, we are talking about what is the benefit that art offers. We cloud it in secrecy and obfuscation. Even if you don't understand obfuscation, it's okay. As long as you understand, we cloud it in secrecy. Obfuscation means to deliberately try to confuse someone. So art does not absolutely clarify things, it does not say things out loud. It maintains a bit of mystery, and that is what is good about it. That's my understanding of the paragraph. Let's take a look at our first option. Art echoes the language that is unintelligible. So first of all, we're not trying to say that art is unintelligible in the sense that we cannot understand it. Yes, there is a bit of mystery to it, but it still communicates something. So option 1 therefore is out, primarily because of the word unintelligible. 2 says art expresses what humans cannot communicate in words. So is art expressive? Yes. The unsayable can be said without having to actually say it. So it does express something without using words, without having to say it. So option 2 looks pretty good. The third one says art unfolds the mystery of human tongues. Well, it doesn't really talk about human language per se. It does not say that it clarifies the mystery. In fact, it says that it is clouded in secrecy and obfuscation. So the moment we say it unfolds the mystery, it kind of goes against that theme. So it is not the third option. The fourth one, any piece of art defies expression. I eliminated this because it says any piece of art, which is a pretty big generalization. The fifth one says, explaining an art metamorphoses into another piece of art. So for example, I create a painting, then I try to explain that painting, and it will give rise to another piece of art. First of all, the whole idea is that art should not be explained. We are definitely not saying that explaining art leads to another art form or another piece of art. So this is going beyond the scope of the passage. So option 5 is out, which means that our answer is option 2. The question here is, which of the following options can be best concluded from the passage? I found this question a little difficult. I mean, I understood the paragraph, but I thought the options were a little close. So let's focus on the main points. First of all, we are trying to present an idea that the author says is wrong. A silly idea is current that good people do not know what temptation means. This is what people generally believe. Then the author says, but obviously that's incorrect. only those who try to resist temptation know how strong it is. Then there are a few examples to explain this. After that, the next major point is given to us in the last sentence. That is why bad people in one sense know very little about badness. They have lived a sheltered life by always giving in. So what are we trying to say? That you get to know something only when you try to resist it or you fight it, kind of. Now, keeping that in mind, let's evaluate our options. I actually started with option 3. I was a little confused about option 1 and 2. So let's look at 3 first. How we label ourselves depends entirely on how much we have fought for that label. So this, I thought, should not be the answer, because we are not trying to label ourselves as good or bad. We are talking about whether we are actually good or bad. So that is why option 3 was not too difficult to eliminate. The fourth one says, most of the population does not know. So the moment it says most of the population, it's trying to quantify, but we don't really know what percentage of the population knows or does not know. So let's eliminate 4. The fifth one says, to claim to be good people, we should know what temptation means. What this is trying to say is that good people know what temptation means. Look at this line. This line means that good people actually know what temptation is, but we cannot reverse it in terms of logic and say that to claim to be good, we should know what temptation means. So you have to understand that when we say if X then Y, it does not mean when Y then X. That reversal does not always follow. So option 5 is therefore not correct. Now you do struggle a little bit between 1 and 2. Look at 1. The main reason that I eliminated 1 was that it says to claim to know anything, which I thought was a pretty extreme word to use. And that is the reason that I eliminated 1. Apart from that, I honestly would not have been able to choose between the two. Now let's look at 2. Unless we are put to test for our beliefs, we do not know what our true beliefs are. So what this is trying to say is that unless you actually are tested or tempted, you will not realize whether you are good or bad. That's exactly what the paragraph is saying. So yes, we are talking about people being tested and then being proven good or bad, and that is why option 1 is not the right choice, it is option 2. There are some passages you read and at the end of it you say, oh, this is so true. This is one of those passages. So I quite enjoyed this one. But the first paragraph feels a little abrupt. In fact, the first sentence does not make any sense until you have read most of the passage. This fluidity and situational dependence is uniquely human. So we don't know what we are talking about so far. But after that, the paragraph is fairly easy to understand. We are talking about how in other species, in-group versus out-group distinctions are related to biology. In-group refers to groups with which we identify. These are groups to which we feel we belong. Out-groups are groups to which we do not belong. In other words, it is the distinction between us and them. We versus others. All right. Then it says that rodents distinguish between a sibling, a cousin and a stranger by smell. These are fixed genetically determined pheromonal signatures and adapt their cooperation accordingly. They are able to literally sniff out who is related to them and who is not related to them. Accordingly, they decide to cooperate or not cooperate with those creatures. Similarly, chimps act the same way. So we're trying to establish here how humans versus other species identify in-group versus out-group. So that becomes the topic. Now, as I said, the first sentence does not make too much sense until you read the rest of the passage. But since I have read the rest of the passage, for me it's very easy to interpret what this paragraph is saying. We're trying to say that humans make in-out group distinctions due to the situation. Whereas in other species, this distinction is made on the basis of biology. Now let's move on to paragraph 2. In this paragraph, we are explaining that human group mentality is often utterly independent of such instinctual familial bonds. That means that people that we feel related to or connected to are not instinctively or biologically determined. Instead, they are culturally determined. So we actually feel close to people who are biological strangers to us because of certain cultural rituals that we might have undergone together. For example, military drills that produce bands of brothers. Similarly, unrelated college freshmen become sorority sisters, or the bygone value of welcoming immigrants into the American family. So, what we're trying to say is that amongst other species, the in-group or relatedness to a group is determined by biology, whereas in humans, this relatedness is determined by culture. And after that, it just takes the examples of how certain cultural norms create this feeling of belongingness amongst people. So the argument here is that humans form group identities not through biological kinship or relatedness, but through culturally created bonds. So that's it. If you have read the second paragraph, then you have pretty much understood the passage, and the first para is also going to make a lot more sense to you. Now, paragraph 3 says that these cultural communities are arbitrary. In other words, they are pretty random and they are determined by situations. On the other hand, biological kinship is pretty logical and fixed. We can choose our friends, but we can't choose our family, right? That's kind of what it relates to. That these cultural communities amongst humans are randomly determined, and sometimes it is just the course of history or the course of events that determines it. It takes the example of how certain immigrants or immigrant families might leave one country and move to another. As a result, their children's lives are going to be changed greatly. The groups with which they identify with, the situations that move them emotionally are going to be very different depending on whether they identify with the country of their birth or the country that they have adopted. So here it says, had my grandparents and father missed the train out of Moscow that they instead barely made, maybe I would be a chain-smoking Russian academic rather than a Birkenstock-wearing American one. So ultimately, in this paragraph, we are trying to say that our cultural and national identities are shaped by chance and history, not by biology. Let's do a quick recap. In the first paragraph, we introduced the topic, which is in-group versus out-group. These distinctions amongst humans are changeable and they are situational, whereas in other species, they are usually determined by biology. Then we said that amongst humans, group identities are dependent on cultural norms. And then finally, we talked about how our identities are shaped by very random events and history and not by biology. So ultimately, the argument that we are trying to make is that human kinship or human groups, they are culturally constructed rather than biologically constructed. So if you've understood that, you will get the answers to most of the questions. It's not a very difficult passage. The question is, based on the passage, how are rodents and humans similar to each other? To answer the questions in this passage, I think focusing on the central idea is very, very important. So yes, we are going to look at the first paragraph, but since the first paragraph is not very easy to interpret, we will also look at the second one. So in context of the second one, the first one makes sense. In the first para, we start off by saying that in other species, in-group, out-group distinction reflect degrees of biological relatedness. Now, let's contrast that with what happens in the case of humans. Most modern human societies instead rely on cultural kin selection. So, we are related to what we are in a biological sense, total strangers. We identify with total strangers because of cultural reasons, not biological reasons. And this is the primary difference between rodents and humans. Now, our first option says, both rodents and humans carry a genetically determined pheromonal signature. This is true only of rodents. This may not be true of humans. At least the passage does not tell us that. So, option 1 is easy to eliminate. The second one says, both rodents and humans are hostile towards outsiders. So, here we are definitely saying that rodents are able to sniff out their siblings, cousins and others who are biologically related. Similarly, chimps predominantly harm outsiders. But nowhere does it say that humans are hostile towards outsiders, because our group identification is not biologically determined in any case. But that point set aside, humans are hostile towards outsiders is simply not given. So let's eliminate the second option. The third one says both rodents and humans can rein their instincts. So are we saying that rodents are able to get past this biological relatedness and still be nice to outsiders? No. The passage does not tell us that rodents can rein their instincts. So option 3 is out. The fourth one, both rodents and humans divide the world between us and them. What is common between us and other species is the distinction between in-group and out-group. In-group is us, out-group is them. The way that we make this distinction is different. But yes, we do definitely have group identities. So option 4 makes sense. Now option 5 says both rodents and humans make their groups exclusive of brothers and cousins. So this option was a little difficult for me to understand because it could mean two opposite things. It could mean that rodents and humans only include brothers and cousins in their groups. That is one meaning. Even if that is the meaning, this option is definitely not true because humans can relate to people who are biological strangers. So that way option 5 doesn't work. The other way of interpreting option 5, which is less likely, is that rodents and humans do not include brothers and cousins in their groups because that's what exclusive of means. If it had said exclusively of, then yes, we would have said that the groups include brothers and cousins only. So either way, this is not a similarity between rodents and humans because rodents determine their groups on the basis of biology, humans do not. And so option 5 is not going to be our answer. The answer is option 4. The question is, what does the author best mean when they say this fluidity and situational dependence is uniquely human? Now this is the very first sentence of the passage, but the sentence does not make sense until you read the entire passage. That is why we are going to be looking at all 3 paragraphs or at least the most important points in each para. So para 1 has that specific line and we are trying to say in para 1 that in other species the distinction between in and out group is biological. In para 2, we are saying this distinction is cultural. And in para 3, we are saying that these groups are arbitrary. So this is the messaging of each of the paras. Now let's keep the entire passage in mind when we read our options. The first one says, the implicit traits that humans associate with can change over time. So first of all, we are not trying to say that we associate with traits necessarily, we associate with certain groups. So if I am thinking about the main idea of the passage, then we are not identifying with traits, we are identifying with certain types of people. That is one way to eliminate one. The second thing is that we are not necessarily saying that we identify with different groups over time. This changeability over time is not a theme in the passage at all. So regardless of how you look at it, option 1 is not going to work. The second one says, humans are uniquely progressive and ever evolving. First of all, what is unique about humans is fluidity and situational dependence, but this basically refers to group identification. It does not talk about general progressiveness. Plus, it definitely does not talk about evolution. So option 2 seems to be a very generic point unrelated to the passage. The third one says human kin selection is not based on instinctual familial bonds while relating to strangers. That in fact seems to be true according to para 2. So we are going to keep the third option. The fourth one says humans use cognitive architecture to detect any potential cues about social coalitions and alliances. How do we figure out whom we want to relate to? Do we use cognitive architecture? Not necessarily. We are trying to say that our kin selection is cultural. Because we undergo certain similar rituals, therefore we feel a sense of connection with other humans. We are not trying to say that it is our cognitive architecture that helps us make that distinction. So maybe not the fourth one. The fifth one says humans in-group, out-group thinking is influenced by their space and time. Now, this also seems to be true because when we say situational dependence, the same theme is echoed in the third paragraph. Look at para 3. We are trying to say that our identities are arbitrary and subject to the vagaries of history. In other words, they are situational, they are determined by time and space. So while 3 may be true, 3 does not explain situational dependence, whereas 5 does because it refers to space and time. So option 3 is now out, option 5 is the right choice. The question here says, what does the author best mean when they refer to the Battle of Stalingrad and Pearl Harbor? Now this example is given to us in the third para. I would always want to understand what the message of this paragraph is. The message is that our cultural communities or the groups to which we belong to are arbitrary as compared to the fixed logic of biological kin selection. Same thing is said in the last line also, that our national identities, cultural principles, these are just as arbitrary and subject to the vagaries of history. So it's determined by chance and the course of our life events in general. Now, where is the Battle of Stalingrad and Pearl Harbor mentioned specifically here? So we're trying to say that depending on whether I identify as a Russian, which I might have if my family had not immigrated to America, or whether I identify more as an American, I am going to be moved either by the Battle of Stalingrad or Pearl Harbor. It depends on what my cultural connectedness tells me to do. Our first option says humans are capable of selective violence towards each other. But here we are talking about our emotional response to certain events. We are not talking about violence. I mean, yes, here we are talking about battles necessarily, but the focus is not on the violent aspect, but the fact that when we hear these stories, then we are likely to be moved by them, depending on our group affiliations. So option 1 misses the point. Now option 2 looks pretty attractive. Our identities and emotional attachments are subject to erratic interpretation of history. Now as far as I can see, we have used the word arbitrary. So that might support the erratic interpretation of history. But if you read this option very carefully, very carefully, you would realize that we are not talking about historical interpretation. We are talking about how we form these identities. So yes, the words are all correct, but option 2 has a distortion. Our identities and attachments are not subject to historical interpretation. They are subject to historical events. So option 2 is not our answer. The third one, humans' relationship with any specific place depends on their lineage and ancestry. In fact, we are trying to contradict this view that biology does not determine our group affiliation. We are trying to say that lineage and ancestry plays a role in other creatures, but not amongst humans. So option 3 is definitely out. The fourth one, humans do not follow any specific logic when they develop association with a particular cultural community. Now, if you look at the first line, it tries to say that our cultural communities are arbitrary. From that, yes, we might say, okay, arbitrary means it's illogical. But that's not true. You have to interpret this paragraph in the context of the overall passage. We are trying to say that there is a logic to our group identification, but that logic is cultural, it is not biological. So when we say that humans do not follow any specific logic, that's not true. Let's eliminate 4. Now option 5 is the only one left, right? So we can say this is the answer, but you have to also understand that we are talking about emotional identification when we are referring to these specific lines. What this means is that if the author identifies as an American, then they are likely to be moved by the events at Pearl Harbor. If the author identified more as a Russian, then they might be moved to tears during the Battle of Stalingrad. So yes, our interpretation of specific events does depend on our group affiliation, and therefore our emotions are also determined by that. So option 5 has some justification. It's not very easy to arrive at, but once you're able to eliminate option 2, I think this is the only one that talks about emotions. So on that basis, option 5 is the correct choice. Now my assessment of this passage is that it's a little confusing. Maybe the passage is not too bad, but I think some of the answers are a little arbitrary. I'm not sure if you felt the same way. Nevertheless, let's take a look at the first paragraph. It's short. The first line is saying that people usually do not support hereditary privileges. No one argues that the rich should be rich because they were born to wealthy parents. So this part is understandable. After that, look at the last sentence. But no one defends hereditary privilege outright or disputes the principle that careers should be open to talents. So we are talking about supporting hereditary privilege and the fact that mostly people are not in favor of it. Overall, the argument is that no one defends hereditary privilege and most people believe that careers should be based on talent or merit. So we are establishing a general background that people are in favor of meritocracy on the whole. In this paragraph, we are talking about equality of opportunity and we are saying that on the whole, we agree on the principle itself, but we do not agree on what it requires. Then we talk about how people have different viewpoints on affirmative action. Affirmative action refers to any policy in which we deliberately favor disadvantaged groups. For example, reservations would be a form of affirmative action. Now, some people are not in favor of it because they believe that it violates the principle of equality of opportunity. But the defenders of affirmative action say that such policies are necessary because equality of opportunity is not a real thing. It does not take into account that it's not actually a level playing field. So in order to make it a level playing field, we need to ensure that we give certain extra advantages to the disadvantaged groups. So in this paragraph, we are basically trying to say that we agree on the principle of equality of opportunity, but we disagree on how to ensure it or how to bring it about. In paragraph 3, again, we are saying that meritocracy is something that most people feel is desirable. So people agree that that's a good thing, that's what we want. But at the same time, people complain not about the ideal, but about our failure to live up to it. So people are unhappy with the fact that we have not been able to establish a true meritocracy. The reason for that is that the wealthy and the powerful have rigged the system to perpetuate their privileges. So every time that we try to establish a meritocracy, the rich, influential and powerful are able to nudge the system so that it starts favoring them. So ultimately, it does not remain a meritocracy. According to this complaint, look at the last line, meritocracy is a myth, a distant promise yet to be redeemed. This seems to be pretty pessimistic about meritocracy. So the paragraph is trying to say that people praise the ideal of meritocracy, but argue that in practice it doesn't work out because the wealthy and the powerful rig the system. What is rigging the system? It means that you manipulate the system so that it favors you. Let's do a quick recap. So we first said that no one defends hereditary privileges and no one disagrees with the idea that careers should be based on talent or merit. After that, we said that we agree on the principle of equality of opportunity, but we disagree on what it requires. And finally, we said that the ideal of meritocracy is very popular, but in practice, meritocracy fails because the wealthy and the powerful manipulate the system. So the argument overall in the passage is that we accept the ideal of meritocracy, but many believe that the system does not work in practice. The question here is, based on the passage, which of the following inferences cannot be drawn? I thought this was the only easy question in the passage because if you understand the main idea, then you can answer this question. Nevertheless, we will be referring to paragraph 3 for this. The first option says, meritocracy is seen by some as an unfulfilled promise. Now look at this part. Meritocracy is a myth, a distant promise. So that part is supported. The system still skewed in favor of the well-connected, converting the meritocracy into a hereditary aristocracy. So yes, it still favors the well-connected. So option 1 definitely can be drawn, so that's not our answer. The second one says, though the wealthy can pass their advantages to their children, wealth and privilege cannot undermine meritocracy. But that's not true. The wealthy managed to convert meritocracy into a hereditary democracy. So, wealth and privilege can undermine meritocracy, which is why we are trying to say that meritocracy is a myth. True meritocracy does not exist. So, option 2 seems to be the opposite of what paragraph 3 is saying. So, we keep it. The third option says, hereditary privilege is not openly defended but can be perpetuated through policies like abolition of inheritance taxes. Look at paragraph 1. Here we are talking about people who would like to abolish inheritance taxes, and critics say that these people who want to abolish inheritance taxes are endorsing hereditary privilege. So, hereditary privilege is not openly defended, is acknowledged in the first paragraph, but it is also saying that policies like abolition of inheritance taxes indirectly support that hereditary privilege. Since paragraph 1 is clearly talking about this cannot be our answer. The fourth option says equality of opportunity is widely accepted in principle. Now, this is clearly given in paragraph 2. We are trying to say that our disagreements are less about the principle itself than about what it requires. So, equality of opportunity is widely accepted, but what it requires means we disagree about how to achieve it. 4 can be inferred, so this is not our answer. The fifth one, meritocracy is a popular ideal in political rhetoric. So, in political discussions, meritocracy has won the day. Look at paragraph 3. 5 can also be derived. So, our answer is going to be option 2. This question I thought was a little confusing and arbitrary. I will explain why very soon. The question appears to be pretty simple though. Which of the following can be best concluded from the passage? So, if you have understood the main idea, the question should be very simple. The only problem is that there are some very close options. Now, paragraph 3 is where the main point is presented very clearly. In this paragraph, we are trying to say that meritocracy is an ideal, but it is a distant promise yet to be redeemed. So, we are trying to say in general that meritocracy sounds great and we all want to establish a meritocracy, but in practice it does not happen. That's my understanding of paragraph 3 and the passage as a whole. Keeping that in mind, let's evaluate our first option. Meritocracy is a utopian system that is difficult to implement as the wealthy rigs the system. In paragraph 3, we have talked about how people do not complain about the ideal but about our failure to live up to it. So, we are kind of saying that it is a utopian or an idealistic system. What does the word utopian mean? It means perfect in theory but difficult in practice. So, I thought option 1 seems to be a pretty good option. Let's keep it. Let's move on to the second one. In an unequal society, any attempt to execute meritocracy perpetuates inequality. Now, for this, I want you to take a look at this line. The wealthy and the powerful have rigged the system to perpetuate their privilege. They have converted the meritocracy into a hereditary aristocracy. So, it seems like our attempts to establish meritocracy keep failing because the wealthy keep manipulating the system. So, I thought option 2 also could work. So, let's keep option 2 also. The third option says everybody admires meritocracy until it is they or their children's career on the line. This tells us that when meritocracy personally affects us or seems to be to our disadvantage, then we try to reject the system. But paragraph 3 or the rest of the passage do not really say that we reject it when we are personally affected. It seems to suggest that in principle everyone supports a meritocracy. So, option 3 is out. The fourth one, meritocracy is desired by everybody but despised by those rejected by it. Till here, it seems to be correct. Despised by those rejected by it, it doesn't talk about meritocracy rejecting anyone, and it definitely does not say that anyone despises meritocracy. So, I thought this option is easy to eliminate. The fifth one, meritocracy is accepted by everyone. Again, till here it's all good, but not understood by anyone. See, it is the practice of meritocracy that is a problem. It's not that we don't understand it. So, option 5 is also out. Now, between options 1 and 2 is where you are most likely to be confused. I would have probably favored the first option, but apparently the answer is not the first option, the answer is option 2. Now, in hindsight, I can explain why option 1 is not the answer. When we say meritocracy is a utopian system, see, when you label something as utopian, you are basically saying that it is not practical. But that is not what the author is trying to say. The author is trying to say that it could be done if the wealthy do not manipulate the system. So, the focus in option 1 is on blaming the system of meritocracy itself. Whereas the passage says that the reason meritocracy does not work is that the powerful manipulate the system. The system itself is not flawed. And that is why option 1 is not supposed to be the answer. Option 2 rightly says that because it's an unequal society, therefore meritocracy does not work. So option 2 is the correct choice. Now this would have been a question that I would probably have answered and gotten wrong, as I said, but I hope that you did better than I did. The question here looks like it could be complicated, but it's actually very simple. Based on the passage, which of the following will the defenders of affirmative action identify as the main problem in the implementation of the meritocratic system? Now for this, obviously we are going to look at paragraph 2 because this is where we are talking about the defenders of affirmative action. So what is affirmative action? It is policies favoring disadvantaged groups. Now, defenders of affirmative action are saying that affirmative action is essential to make equality of opportunity a reality for members of disadvantaged groups. So these people therefore would support policies such as reservation for disadvantaged groups. Alright. Now the first option says meritocratic system supports those having hereditary privileges. Now this is not the main problem. We are not saying that meritocracy supports hereditary privileges. The passage is trying to say that people who are privileged try to preserve those privileges by manipulating the system. So option 1 in any case does not accord with the passage. The second one says meritocratic system intentionally favors the rich. Again, not quite accurate because the passage says that the rich manipulate the system. Meritocracy in principle is great. So let's eliminate 2. Meritocratic system is based on structural bias. Again, the system is not flawed. It is people who rig the system. So option 3 is also out. The fourth one, meritocratic system rewards individuals based on the outcome they produce. Well, this seems to generally be what a meritocracy is. So it's a good way to understand it. But this is not the main problem in implementation of meritocracy. So option 4 is out. Option 5 is what we derive from here. Meritocratic system does not acknowledge the initial disadvantages. So when we say that we want to make equality of opportunity a reality, it means it is not a reality. Why is it not a reality? Because certain people are disadvantaged and therefore option 5 is the correct choice. This passage on the whole is pretty simple, and the reason that I am saying that is not so much because of the passage but the questions. They have deliberately created options that you are not likely to pick, and therefore it's easy to get to the answer. This passage is also very relevant to our times, so you might want to pay attention to the information that it's giving you. The first paragraph is just 2 lines. The first sentence, when it says work for many on the career track is greedy, what we are trying to say is that work has become demanding. It takes a lot out of you. Specifically, career track work. What does that mean? A career track job is one that offers professional growth in the long term. It offers more responsibility, higher pay, and so on. So, jobs that offer growth, money, responsibility, they also demand a lot out of you. The individual who puts in overtime, weekend time, evening time will earn a lot more. So much more that even on an hourly basis, the person is earning more. So, the topic obviously is greedy work or the incentives of overwork. And the argument we are making is that career track jobs demand extra time and effort, and that people are rewarded for putting in this extra time and effort. Now the second paragraph is pretty lengthy, so I have divided it into 3 parts so that we can process it in bits and pieces. It's much easier to do it that way. The greediness of work means that couples with children or other care responsibilities would gain by doing a bit of specialization. What does that mean? It means that if you have to take care of children or anything else, say pets for example, then both partners cannot be fully committed to work all the time. It demands partners to specialize. So one member will be on call at home, ready to leave the office at a moment's notice. This person will have a position with flexibility, will ordinarily not be expected to answer an email or a call at 10 p.m. So one person has a flexible work situation. The second person will be on call at work and do just the opposite. So this is the kind of specialization that we are talking about. One person is always on call at home, one person is always on call at work. So the argument here is very simple, that demanding careers require partners to take on slightly different roles. One parent takes on a flexible job and the other focuses on their career. This part of the paragraph talks about the potential impact of that specialization on promotion, advancement and earnings. It says that certain jobs, particularly professionals and managers, these jobs have always been demanding. And then it says the value of greedy jobs has greatly increased with rising income inequality. You see, demanding jobs have started paying a lot more over a period of time. That means that earnings at the upper end of the income distribution have ballooned. So there is a lot more incentive for people to take up these demanding jobs. The jobs with the greatest demands have paid a lot, disproportionately more, while earnings in other employments have stagnated. So now let's correlate this with what we have already said. We talked about how one partner who is supposed to be responsible for home and family takes up a flexible job. Now this partner is not going to be earning as much as the other one who has a demanding job. So that's basically what this part is trying to say, that demanding jobs have become even more valuable over time, particularly since income inequality is rising. There are much higher rewards for those who have long, inflexible working hours. Now this part of the paragraph talks about the impact of growth in these greedy jobs for women. It says that there are certain positions that have been more difficult for women to enter in the first place, such as those in finance. It also says that these are the ones that have also seen the greatest increases in income. So, on the whole, there seem to be certain barriers to women's entry in high-paying jobs. Over time, it has gotten worse. How has it gotten worse? It says that greedy work also means that couple equity has been and will continue to be jettisoned for increased family income. So what we are basically saying is that this rising tide of greedy jobs has adversely impacted women. Earlier also, they had a lower chance of entering certain professions, and now because these professions are generally very, very demanding and because partners need to specialize, therefore, in order to increase the family income, a lot of women end up taking jobs which are less demanding and more flexible, and therefore they don't get the promotions and the money that their other partner does. So, that reinforces gender norms, and it also creates a gender pay gap. So, if I have to sum up the entire argument for this part of the paragraph, we are trying to say that demanding jobs have grown the most in income. Now, these demanding jobs have also been in fields where anyway women have had a tough time entering. As a result, gender pay gaps have widened and traditional gender roles have actually been strengthened. Now, let's do a recap. In the first very, very short paragraph, we talked about career track jobs, how they require a lot more time and effort and also earn higher rewards. The second paragraph, which was very long, was broken up into 3 parts. It initially talked about how demanding careers require partners to be a little more specialized in their choices. One partner takes up a flexible job, earns less, puts in fewer hours. The other partner has a more demanding career and earns more. Now, demanding jobs have become more desirable over time because they let you make a lot more money. This in turn has impacted women adversely because it has led to gender pay gaps and it has also reinforced traditional gender roles. So the main point that the author is trying to make is about greedy work. Greedy work is demanding work, it pays you a lot more money. This has led to adverse consequences for women because it has reinforced traditional gender roles and it has also widened the gender pay gap. The question here is, which of the following statements cannot be inferred from the passage? I found that you could use common sense to work through the options here if you have generally understood the passage. But nevertheless, we will keep the text on the screen so that you can refer to it. The first option says, many of those toiling hard on the career track are greedy. Now, I know it seems like it's a pretty generalized statement, but we do have support for this. Look at para 1. It says work for many on the career track is greedy. A person who puts in more overtime in general is likely to earn more. Now, if I put this information together, it basically means that a person will put in a lot more time into work, or a person who works very hard is obviously hoping for higher rewards. So yes, this person, in return for the time and effort they're investing, definitely also demands money. So many of those toiling hard on the career track are greedy. This is supported because otherwise, why would they work so hard? So remember, we are trying to pick something that cannot be inferred. The first one has some support, even though the passage does not directly say it. The second option says flexibility in work may result in relatively lesser income. Now, it says very clearly in paragraph 2, the jobs with the greatest demands for long hours and the least flexibility have paid disproportionately more, while earnings in other employments have stagnated. So, a flexible role is going to pay you less money. This is clear from paragraph 2. This is not our answer. Third one, women can be equally greedy as men. Well, yes, in general, they definitely can be, but does the passage tell us that? So, if you look at paragraph 2 again, look at this part. Women will still pursue demanding careers. Demanding careers, greedy jobs. Because they're investing a lot more time and effort, they want more money. So yes, sometimes women can also be as greedy as men. That is not denied. Therefore, option 3 is not our answer. The fourth one, jobs that extract the most out of the workforce also pay more. For this, again, we just need to refer to this part. The most demanding jobs also pay disproportionately more. So option 4, definitely not it. The root of all problems in the world is greed. This is why I said that you can use common sense to get to the answer. We are not talking about all the problems in the world. This is a sweeping generalization, and therefore option 5 is your answer. The question here is, which of the following about greedy work is correct as per the passage? Now, the first option says, with more women coming into the workforce, work itself is becoming greedier. This seems to suggest that because more women are joining the workforce, therefore work is becoming greedier. But that's not really given to us. Women joining the workforce is not the reason for greedy work. In fact, if you look at paragraph 2, it says that the value of greedy jobs has increased, and look at this part. Women have been swimming upstream. That means it has made life more difficult for women. So women joining the workforce is not the reason for the increase, but increase in greedy jobs has definitely led to adverse consequences for women. So option 1 is not correct. The second option says work that requires more time investment and dedication tends to pay more and hence are sought after. Well, the value of greedy jobs has greatly increased. So it seems that greedy jobs definitely are more sought after. Why? Because these also pay disproportionately more. So option 2 is correct as per the passage. Let's keep it. Third option says greedy work is a result of greedy corporations who reward greedy people. Now, we are not really blaming greedy corporations anywhere in the passage. We are saying that work has gotten greedy, but we are not really saying why and who's responsible for it. So, when I say greedy work is a result of greedy corporations, that's going beyond the scope of the passage. That is why option 3 is not our answer. The fourth one says employees willing to sacrifice their leisure and time with families must be rewarded with higher pay. Now, it seems that on the whole, people who give up family time and free time to work more do get paid more. But the problem with option 4 is must be rewarded. In general, this seems to happen, but there is no criteria that tells us that this has to happen. So option 4 is not the correct choice. The fifth one, organizations prefer only those who surrender their everything to the organization. While this may be true, this is pretty much a generalization still. We are not saying you have to surrender your everything. Yes, it does seem that you have to give more time to the organization, but surrender their everything seems to be a bit much. So option 5 is pretty extreme and that is why we eliminate it. So our answer is going to be option 2. Even if you're not very certain about the other options, I think it's still very easy to get to the answer. Now this seems to be a main idea question. Based on the passage, which of the following options best summarizes the author's views? So we are going to look at our thought flow. Now I'm not going to read it out obviously, but there should be a general sense that we are talking about the rise of greedy work and how it has led to certain consequences for women. So that's what I'm going to be looking for. The first option says, in heterosexual unions, women must pay a price to see their husbands rise to fame. While this may be true, generally yes, it is trying to say that women tend to take up the more flexible jobs, but the focus of the passage is not heterosexual unions. So because of that, this cannot be the summary of the author's views. So I'm not saying it's wrong necessarily, I'm just saying this is not the main point. So option 1 is gone. The second one says greedy work reinforces extant gender norms. Extant means existing, leading to gender pay gap. Now this is clear from the last part of paragraph 2. It does say that demanding jobs have grown and this has led to widening gender pay gaps and reinforced traditional gender roles. So option 2 seems to be on point. The third one, as women try to fight against gender norms, greedy work is their most formidable enemy. So yes, greedy work is reinforcing gender norms, but we can't say this is their most formidable enemy. Too extreme, because we have not really discussed whether greedy work is the most formidable enemy or whether there are other enemies also. So this comparison is not justified. The fourth one, greedy work is the single most important reason for the gender pay gap. Same problem here. When I say single most important reason, it means it is more important than others. That comparison is not there in the passage. So let's eliminate 4. The fifth one, greedy work results in a men's club ensuring that women do not get to be a part. This seems to point to an intentional conspiracy that someone is plotting so that women cannot be a part of the workforce or at least high paying jobs in the workforce. But overall, we're trying to say that the system has evolved that way. We're not trying to say that it's become a men's club and that there is deliberate gatekeeping that keeps women out. So because there is no intention to keep women out deliberately, therefore option 5 is not justified. So let's eliminate this. So our answer is going to be the second option. This passage is quite enlightening because if you understand it, you'll realize that this is in fact very, very true. So I quite enjoyed reading it. The first sentence says, you may laugh at a hat, but what you're making fun of in this case is not the piece of felt or straw. You're not actually laughing at the hat, but the shape that men have given it. When we laugh at a hat, it represents something about human behavior, human caprice, whose mold it has assumed. See, the hat looks the way that it does because a human has shaped it that way. So when you laugh at a hat, what you're actually laughing at is human behavior. So this is what the paragraph is all about, that whenever we find something funny, it is because of some resemblance to man of the stamp he gives it or the use he puts it to. So in this passage, we are talking about humor or laughter. And we are trying to say that we laugh primarily at human traits or human behavior. It has to be something that resembles man or human. Now this is a very long paragraph, but the message is very, very clear. In fact, it is given to us in the first line itself. Here I would point out as a symptom equally worthy of notice, the absence of feeling which usually accompanies laughter. So I know it feels counterintuitive. When we laugh, we think, okay, we're feeling happy. But what this is saying is that in order for us to laugh, there has to be absence of feeling. And the paragraph explains why that is true. It's trying to say that anything comic or funny would not actually be funny unless it fell on the surface of a soul that is thoroughly calm and unruffled. So in order for you to find something funny, you have to be perfectly calm underneath. Otherwise, you're not likely to find it funny. Indifference is its natural environment for laughter has no greater foe than emotion. So, if you're very emotional about something, you're not likely to laugh at it. Then it takes the example of someone whom we feel pity for. We're not saying that you will never laugh at that person. But when you are laughing at that person, you are temporarily suspending that emotion of pity. You could also laugh at someone that you love. But when you are laughing, you are temporarily suspending that emotion of love. So in order for you to find something funny, emotion has to be out of the picture. After that, it says that in general, if you become interested in everything that is being said and done, act in imagination with those who act and feel with those who feel. In other words, if you feel a part of the world, if you empathize with the people and the actors in that life situation, then you are not likely to find it funny. Then you will feel the emotions that those people are feeling. But the moment you take a step back and start looking at life as a spectator, then you are emotionally detached to the situation. You have an intellectual indifference, and then you will find that situation funny. It takes the example of how if you look at people dancing and all of a sudden you mute the music, all right, then you're able to look at the dancing without feeling anything. The music is what produces the emotion. So if you're not feeling anything, all of a sudden all the dancing will appear very comical to you. To produce the whole of its effect, we are talking about comic effect. The comic demands something like a momentary anesthesia of the heart. Its appeal is to intelligence, pure and simple. So to sum it up, we are talking about how emotional detachment is necessary for humor, which means that the argument here is that humor requires a suspension of emotion and an emotional detachment from the situation in order for us to laugh at it. Let's do a very quick recap. There are only 2 paragraphs and they're fairly simple to understand. In the first paragraph, we talked about how laughter is tied to something fundamentally human. And in the second paragraph, we required humor to be a product of suspension of emotion. We have to practice intellectual detachment to not really feel anything in order to find it funny. And this pretty much is the main message of this passage also. We laugh only when we temporarily shut off our emotions and view human behavior with detached intellectual distance. We have to look at the world as a spectator to find aspects of it funny. The question here is, what does the author best mean when they say, it seems as though the comic could not produce its disturbing effect unless it fell, so to say, on the surface of a soul that is thoroughly calm and unruffled. See, whenever you are given a sentence like this, you have to always interpret it in context, link it to the larger purpose of that paragraph. So, we are going to look at the lines before and after also. The line before says that absence of feeling accompanies laughter. So, that tells me that laughter requires suspending emotion. After that also, it says laughter has no greater foe than emotion. So, if you are feeling emotional, we are not likely to find something funny. So, that's my understanding. So, my shadow answer is that laughter requires absence of emotion. And detachment. To the event. Now, whatever we find matching this is going to be our answer. Look at the first option. Comics are the most effective when the audience is unaware of the context. So, might be tempting, but we are not saying that you are unaware of the context. You are probably not empathizing with the actors, but you are perfectly aware of what is going on there. So, option 1 is not really what the author is trying to say. The second one, unless one is emotionally detached from the event, it is impossible to appreciate a comical view. This has at least some of the key ideas that we wanted. Emotionally detached. Now, I know that it seems pretty extreme, but look at the very first line. It says, absence of feeling which usually accompanies laughter.
indifference is its natural environment, laughter has no greater foe than emotion. So yes, we are saying that emotional detachment is kind of necessary, otherwise you're not going to find it funny. So let's keep 2. Option 3 says, relaxed people tend to find edgy or disturbing comedy funnier. If you just look at the words but you do not truly understand the meaning, then you might pick option 3. The reason for that is that this line says the comic could not produce its disturbing effect unless it fell on a soul that is thoroughly calm and unruffled. So, calm is equal to relaxed, disturbing effect we might match with the word disturbing here, but then you're missing the forest for the trees basically. What we are trying to say is that the comic effect will not be produced unless you are unemotional. We are not commenting on the type of comedy. We are not saying that disturbing comedy is more likely to be funny. We are saying that comedy itself is not going to have any impact unless we are calm and detached. So option 3 therefore is not the message that the author wants to pass on. Let's eliminate. The 4th one, to appreciate humor with an unsettling tone. This is also trying to play on the phrase its disturbing effect. See, we are not commenting on the type of humor. We are just saying that we will not find anything humorous unless we are not feeling any emotions in that process. So, option 4 we will eliminate for very similar reasons as 3. It is trying to limit itself to a type of comedy. The 5th one, comical behavior disturbs those more deeply whose minds are calm and composed. So, first of all, people who are calm and composed are more likely to find something comic. They are not likely to be disturbed by it. That means option 5 is also a distortion. Our answer is going to be option 2, and the reason is that you have to understand the author's main point in this paragraph. Option 2 kind of represents the main point, and that is why it's the best match. So please make sure that you focus on the meaning rather than just matching the text. Based on the passage, which of the following statements cannot be inferred? The first statement says, when you laugh at a hat, you laugh at a human being it represents. Now, look at para 1. You may laugh at a hat, but what you are making fun of in this case is not the object itself, but the shape that men have given it. The human caprice whose mold it has assumed. So, we are laughing at the person who has made that hat, which means option 1 can be inferred. That's why it's not our answer. The second one says, comic happens in a setting of emotional detachment, having a sense of distance. That is given to us multiple times. Look at paragraph 2. The absence of feeling accompanies laughter. Now, after that also, look at the last part in para 2. Comic demands something like a momentary anesthesia of the heart. So, comic happens in a setting of emotional detachment. You have to stop feeling things. After that also, look at this part. Highly emotional souls in unison with life, in whom every event would be sentimentally prolonged and re-echoed, would neither know nor understand laughter. So again, if you're emotional, you're not going to find anything funny. So I think we have enough proof to say that option 2 definitely can be inferred. So that's out. Third one, when strong emotions are involved, laughter cannot be invoked. This I would derive from this part here. Highly emotional souls would neither know nor understand laughter because they're feeling everything. So they will not find it funny, they're not detached. Option 3 can be inferred, so this is out. The fourth one says, inanimate objects can become a subject of laughter because they may project human characteristics. This we get from the first paragraph. You may laugh at a hat, but you're actually laughing at human caprice. Caprice refers to a sudden whim or a change of mind or the unpredictability of behavior. So yes, we are ultimately laughing at human behavior or human traits that have given shape to that hat. So option 4 can be inferred. Now option 5 is the only one left. The reason that I thought it cannot be inferred is that when it says experiences that demand momentary anesthesia, I thought this is not necessarily the same as momentary anesthesia of the heart. We are talking about absence of emotion. But momentary anesthesia does not necessarily convey absence of emotion. It means that you are absolutely immune to all sorts of sensation. So we're not saying absence of sensation, we're saying absence of feelings. So this is not necessarily equal to this. But there is one more thing that you could possibly look at. Humor only springs from experiences that demand momentary anesthesia. This suggests that only certain types of experiences can produce humor. But that's not what the author is saying. The author is basically trying to convey that in any situation, if you want to be able to laugh at it, you need to practice emotional detachment. So humor is not the result of certain types of experiences. Humor can be the result of any experience as long as you are a detached spectator. So there also I thought there is a bit of a difference in what the author is saying versus what option 5 is saying. It's a nuance, I agree. But since 1, 2, 3, 4 were fairly easy to eliminate, I was fairly certain that option 5 is going to be the answer. And that's how I would say that you can be confident of option 5 as well. I found this question a little difficult, at least at first glance, but when you calm yourself and look at the whole thing with a very detached view, then you're able to answer it. Based on the passage, which of the following statements will the author best agree with? So again, I do need to keep in mind what the author is generally trying to say, the main idea. The main idea is very clear. In order for us to laugh at something, it has to be related to human characteristics and we need to be emotionally detached to the situation. So this we must have understood. The first option says, comedy is simply a funny way of being serious. Now, comedy, funny, serious, these seem to be relevant, but when you put these words together, then it doesn't really convey what the author is saying. So I am going to show you the text one more time. All that the author is saying is that in order for us to laugh, there has to be absence of feeling. The author is not trying to say that comedy is a way of being serious. Comedy is not being equated with seriousness. So option 1 therefore is not your answer. The second one says, life is a tragedy when seen in close-up, but a comedy in long shot. When you zoom in, you don't find it funny. When you zoom out, then it's kind of funny. Now, where does this have support? Let's start reading from here. If you become interested in everything that is being said and done, act with those who act and feel with those who feel, in a word, give your sympathy its widest expansion, then you will see the flimsiest of objects assume a gloomy hue. So from here to here, we're trying to say that if you are involved in the situation or in the lives of people in that situation, then you're probably going to sympathize with them and you will not find it funny. But step aside, look upon life as a disinterested spectator. When you say step aside, what does that mean? Zoom out, don't be a part of the situation anymore. And many a drama will turn into a comedy. So there is some support for two. In close-up, life might seem sad. Everything might assume a gloomy hue. When you step aside, drama will turn into a comedy. So let's keep the second option. The third one says, comedy is an escape, not from truth, but from despair. We are not saying comedy is an escape anywhere. We are just saying that in order to find something comic, you have to take a step back. So, option 3 is not our answer. The fourth one says, a person who knows how to laugh at himself will never cease to be amused. So, we are not saying humor is directed at the self. We are saying humor is directed at human behavior, but not necessarily the self. So, option 4 doesn't have enough support. Now, option 5 says comedy is but tragedy, cunningly disguised and popularized for the multitude. We are not saying that comedy is disguised as tragedy or the other way around. There is no disguise. We are trying to say that you need to change your perspective in order to find something comic. So, option 5 is therefore out. The correct answer is option 2. Usually, I tell people don't be scared of the poem. Poems are easy. But I thought this poem was a bit of an exception because I honestly could not make head or tail out of it. So I read it multiple times and I thought, okay, it's talking about something shaking and trembling. So I'm just looking at the first 3 lines. Look how you turned on the ceiling fan. It's too high. See how it shakes and trembles, right? So there is some person who's definitely causing some unease or anxiety. That's what the first 3 lines conveyed to me. Now look at the next part, which is in black. You walk into this room with your hot ideas and the ceiling fan has to work harder to cool down the room for us. That means that because of a particular person who has these unsettling or hot ideas, others have to compensate. So the ceiling fan is probably a metaphor for other people or for the poet. So that's how I thought this makes sense. Now the last bit says, you walk into this room with your crazy eyes and the ceiling fan wants to fly loose. It dreams of becoming a spider lily. Now, in case you don't know what a spider lily is, then this part might be a little more difficult to understand. Thankfully, I'm fond of gardening, so I know what it is. A spider lily is obviously a flower. It's supposed to represent peace, grace, calm, the opposite of how the fan is feeling. So, this part is trying to tell us that the fan and perhaps the speaker or the poet longs for peace, beauty and escape. That is why the ceiling fan wants to fly loose. You want to escape from that chaotic situation and you want to transform into something peaceful and calm. So, there is some person who seems to be having a very unsettling effect on the people around them, and because of that, those people want to escape and they long for peace. That is the overall story. As I said, this took some effort, so I wouldn't expect you to be able to do this in about 2-3 minutes. Most poems are easy, this one is not. But if you have understood this, or at least 50% of this, then maybe you have a shot. The question here is, which of the following statements best conveys the theme of the poem? So the theme of the poem has to do with unsettling others, keeping things calm, and escape from chaos. Alright, so these are the ideas that I am going to use to evaluate my options. The first option says the poem conveys quest for self during emotional turmoil. There is emotional turmoil, undoubtedly, but there is no quest for self, there is quest for escape. So, quest for self is not justified. The second one, the poem talks about a conflict between transformation and escapism. I like this option because it has the word escapism. And when it says that the fan wants to become a spider lily, then yes, I guess the fan wants to transform. So let's keep 2. The third one says the poem conveys the subtle art of argumentation and counter-argumentation. First of all, there's nothing subtle in this poem. It clearly says it shakes and trembles, hot ideas, so no subtlety. And there is no argument. It is just one person who's making others feel uncomfortable and they want to escape. So I thought this is definitely irrelevant. The fourth option says the poem talks about inner conflict resolved by an attempt to restore balance. So, resolved by an attempt. When we say it dreams of becoming a spider lily, we don't know whether it has been able to escape. So, there is no resolution, and that is why it is not the fourth option. Now, the fifth one also seems to be on point. The poem conveys fear and anxiety due to loss of stability. So now, between 2 and 5, how do I choose? I'm going to go back to the text as usual. Due to loss of stability, that I would probably derive from shakes and trembles. Fear and anxiety, the ceiling fan has to work harder to cool down the room. So, you have to struggle to compensate for the chaos that this person brings into your life. Due to loss of stability is justified, fear and anxiety is justified, and because you want to escape that chaos, you dream of transforming into something else. So, option 5 seems to be okay. Now, look at the second one. Conflict between transformation and escapism. Now, my problem here is with the word conflict. Escapism and transformation in this poem seem to be part of the same deal, in the sense that if you transform into a spider lily, you will also escape the situation. So, there is no conflict between the two, and that is why it is not option 2. This required a little bit of thought. I know it seems like I'm just presenting it to you, but yes, this was difficult for me. So, the answer ultimately is the fifth option. As I said, tough poem, not very easy options either. I might have wanted to let go of this if I was not forced to solve it. The question here is, what does the author best mean when she says you walk into this room with your hot ideas and the ceiling fan has to work harder to cool down the room for us? Now, obviously, we have already interpreted the poem. So my understanding is that the fan struggles to compensate, just like people might struggle to keep things calm around this person. And the last part talks about escapism and so on. The first option says that the person's presence creates palpable tension in the room. Now, this seems like it could be correct, could work. The second option says that the person brings with him passionate intellectual and emotional energy. This seems to be a pretty positive option. And the author definitely is not saying anything positive, because when you talk about shaking and trembling and the ceiling fan has to work harder, then this person is not bringing any positivity into the room. So I would eliminate the second option. That the person's presence develops self-doubt in others. When you shake and tremble, yes, it could represent doubt, but on the whole, what it represents is chaos rather than doubting yourself. You may be perfectly content with yourself until this person walks into the room and all of a sudden you start feeling a little anxiety and you want to escape the situation. But none of that implies self-doubt. So maybe not the third option. The fourth one says that the person's presence makes the ceiling fan lose its ability to handle intense energy. If you choose this option, then you're not familiar with poems. The ceiling fan obviously is not just a fan, it's a metaphor for the poet or other people. Option 4 therefore does not capture the significance of that metaphor, so this is out. The fifth one says that the person's hostile presence makes others feel unwelcomed. You see, the other people are already in the room. When this person enters the room, it creates anxiety amongst the others. So the feeling is more of anxiety than unwelcome. And that is why option 5 is not the right choice. So the only one that talks about anxiety is the first option, palpable tension, and therefore option 1 is the right choice. I thought this passage was fairly easy to read and understand. The first paragraph just talks about an experiment that was designed. But you have to remember that in this case, or whenever they talk about a study or an experiment, you need to check for what the conclusion is, right? So that is why the first paragraph is honestly not very, very important. It just talks about the design of the experiment or the hypothesis that it was trying to test. So it says that a team of social scientists launched an experiment to test that hypothesis. Obviously, this paragraph has been taken from somewhere later in the passage. It's not the beginning of the article. So we don't know what the hypothesis is. But as you keep reading it, you realize what they're trying to test. It says, what differed was whether the training focused on cognitive skills or character skills. So there are 2 training groups and 1 control group. The control group went about their business as usual. The other 2 groups, one of them went for cognitive skill training, the second went for character skill training. In cognitive skills training, they learned about finance, accounting, HR, marketing, pricing, and so on. So this is cognitive skills. In character skill training, they attended a class designed by psychologists to teach personal initiative. They studied proactivity, discipline and determination and practiced putting those qualities into action. So it's fairly simple to understand. An experiment was designed. The purpose of that experiment was to check the impact of cognitive skill versus character skill training for entrepreneurs. And after that, it tells us that this experiment happened. That's it. So here we don't know the results of the experiment, although I can guess what the results might be, but still let's wait until we read the rest of the paragraph. So here all we are saying is that an experiment was designed to test the impact of cognitive skill training and character skill training on entrepreneurs in West Africa. The entire thing seems to be just one paragraph, so I've just divided it into 3 parts so that we can process smaller bits of it. Now in this part of the paragraph, we are presenting the results of the study. Character skills training had a dramatic impact. The firm's profits grew by an average of 30% over the next 2 years, which was nearly triple the benefit of the training in cognitive skills. So, character skills seem to have a greater impact than cognitive skill training. That is what the study found. After that, it generalizes the results of the study. So if you look at the last 2-3 sentences, it says that along with demonstrating that character skills can propel us to achieve greater things, this evidence reveals that it's never too late to build them. Character retains its plasticity. And this is pretty much the purpose of this paragraph. We are first trying to say that character skills had a greater impact on business success. So this is one part of the argument. The second part is that these skills can be developed at any age. So if you have understood this much, then you don't need to worry about anything more. Let's now take a look at the last bit. Now here we are differentiating between character and personality. The author says that they are two different things. Personality is your predisposition, your basic instincts. Character is your capacity to prioritize your values over your instincts. It says that just knowing what your principles are does not mean that you will act on them. Character allows you to act on your principles. Personality apparently is how you normally behave. Character is what helps you act on your principles or stick to your principles in difficult circumstances. So then it says over here, personality is how you respond on a typical day. Character is how you show up upon a hard day. And after that, it clearly says that there is no reason why you cannot grow your character skills starting now. So we've already established that character is plastic, that you can change or develop those skills at pretty much any age. So the message here is that personality reflects your natural tendencies, character is your ability to act according to your values, especially under difficulty, and that you can refine your character at any age. Now let's do a quick recap. An experiment was designed to test the impact of cognitive versus character skill training on entrepreneurs. Then we presented the results, which said that character skills boosted business success, and this was significantly more than cognitive or technical training. After that, we said that personality reflects your natural tendencies, whereas character reflects your ability to act according to your principles in difficult circumstances. So overall, the message here is that character skills have a greater outcome or greater impact on long-term success than cognitive skills. And unlike personality, character can be intentionally developed over time and at any age. This question asks us, which of the following views would the author best agree with? Now, this could be a main idea question or it could be a specific inference question also. So, we'll have to look at the options. Our behavior is a function of our character, not our personality. Well, if you don't look at the passage, you might fall for this one, but this is not accurate because look at this part. If personality is how you respond on a typical day, character is how you show up on a hard day. So, our behavior is a function of character and personality. We're not saying it is one over the other. So, that's one eliminated. The second one says, character skills risk abandoning your personality along with your instincts. So, first of all, we are not really trying to say that character means abandoning your personality. Look at this part. Personality is your predisposition, your basic tendencies. Character is your capacity to prioritize your values over your instincts. But it does not mean that you are completely abandoning your personality or instincts. So, because of this, I think we can eliminate two. The third one says, because principles clash with your personality, character is needed. So, do principles always clash with our personality? No, not necessarily. Knowing your principles doesn't necessarily mean you know how to practice them, particularly under stress or pressure. So, our principles might be tested in difficulty. It's not that our personality always goes against our principles. So, let's eliminate 3. The fourth one says, our values and principles are always put to test by our personality. Again, always put to test? No, it is under stress or pressure that they are tested. So, option 4 is also eliminated. The fifth one says, putting our values and principles to practice requires transcending our personality. Now, for this, I would look at this part. Knowing your principles does not mean that you will practice them. It is easy to be proactive when things are going well. The true test of character is when you manage to stand by those values when the deck is stacked against you. So, character does mean going beyond your basic tendencies or instincts when things are difficult. So when it says that putting our values and principles to practice requires transcending our personality, yes, it does, because in a difficult situation, that is what we might need to do. That is why I think option 5 is a fairly easy option to select. In fact, you don't really need to look at the details. If you just kind of understand what the author is trying to tell you, then I think you should be able to answer this question. Now here we have an inference question. Which of the following can be best inferred from the passage? I thought this is not too difficult. The first option is character skills can compensate for poor cognitive skills. See, we've said that character skills had a greater impact on success as compared to cognitive skills. But that does not mean that they can compensate for poor cognitive skills. I'm not saying that even if you do not know anything about finance or marketing, pricing and so on, just because you have great character, you will succeed. So, option 1 cannot be inferred. The second one says cognitive skills, unlike character skills, are always reactive. So, here we have talked about the fact that when you have character skills, you learn to anticipate things. From this, we might suggest that, okay, if you don't have these character skills, then you might have a more reactive approach. But cognitive skills are always reactive, cannot be supported. We are not saying cognitive skills are reactive. We are saying that if you have character skills, then you are not always reactive. So I hope you appreciate the difference between these two. Option 2 is not our answer. The third one, sustainable success in life requires strong character skills. So yes, it does kind of support that right here. Sustainable success is long-term success because it says their firm's profits grew by an average of 30% over the next 2 years. And it requires strong character skills. Yes, I mean, it seems that character skills help them achieve this success. So I would probably say that 3 is supported. The fourth one, character skills can be built only if one believes in them. Now, look at this part. Knowing your principles doesn't necessarily mean you know how to practice them, particularly under stress or pressure. So, you don't have to just believe in character skills. You need to develop your character in order to stick to your principles in difficulty. So, belief in character skills is not what will help you develop your character. Actively practicing or developing those character skills is what will help you. So, option 4 is a slight distortion. Let's eliminate that. Now, we have the fifth option. Being aware of your character skills enables you to exercise them. If you look at this part here, knowing your principles doesn't mean you know how to practice them. So, just because you are aware of your principles or character does not mean that you will stick to it. That means option 5 is definitely not our answer, contradicted by the text. So, ultimately our answer is option 3, which again is linked to the main idea of the passage that success or long-term success is related to character skills. Option 3 is definitely the right choice. Now, this question I thought was a little challenging because this requires you to read into the text a little bit more. I mean, it requires you stretching the data in order to understand what the answer is. Based on the passage, why would character skills help entrepreneurs more than cognitive skills? See, the text does not tell us that. It just tells us what are the cognitive skills that they worked on and what are the character skills they worked on. It also tells us what was the business impact of those character skills. So, we will take a look at the data, but as I said, you do need to read into it a little bit more. Our first option says, character skills prepare you for an uncertain future. So, first of all, these are your character skills. Proactivity, discipline, determination. Alright. Now, look at what the difference was. First of all, it says that they were able to generate opportunities. So, this was one of the things that happened. They learned to anticipate market changes. So, maybe the second thing, maybe it's the same thing. They developed more creative ideas. When they encountered financial obstacles, they were more resilient and resourceful. Right? So, these are the 4 things that happened as a result of character skills training. So character skills prepare you for an uncertain future is kind of supported, because if you're able to generate opportunities, if you're able to anticipate market changes, if you're more resilient, then it kind of means that you are more future ready. So I would keep one. Again, I'm not absolutely sure, I'm just saying that it's not too bad. The second one says entrepreneurs are already aware of their business and are only missing character skills. So first of all, in this study, we are not trying to say that they had all the business knowledge that they needed, but they were only missing character skills. And because we provided the character skills training, because they already understood their business, it helped them a lot. So we can't establish that they were only missing character skills and that cognitive skill training was not necessarily required. That is why option 2 is out. Now option 3 also was a good candidate. Character skills are industry agnostic in application. Now you don't see it in the text here, but if you look at the very beginning of the passage, it tells you that these entrepreneurs were taken from many different types of industries. So yes, in a way the character skills that they learned seem to be working across industries. That's true. But the question is not asking you that. It is asking you, why would character skills help more than cognitive skills? We are not necessarily saying that because they are not industry specific, that is why they were helpful. Because they were not industry specific, that is why they were helpful. This is not the answer to the question. Because while that may be true, we don't have any data to support it. All these 4 outcomes that we have highlighted, generating opportunity, anticipating market changes, creativity, resilience, this tells us more that people were able to prepare better for the future rather than focusing on how the industry does not matter. So obviously I'm making a choice between 1 and 3 and saying that there is slightly more support for 1 as compared to 3. Again, very shaky ground, I agree, but let's eliminate 3. The 4th one, character skills enable you to generate opportunities rather than capitalize on existing ones. I think this is the option that most of us were likely to pick because this is clearly given to us. But then, this is just one of the things that happened. What about all the other outcomes that character skills training produced? So option 4 you should eliminate because it is too narrow. This is not the only reason. Option 5, one can be poor in finance and quantitative skills but really good in character skills. We are not saying that if you lack cognitive skills but have great character, you will succeed. Being poor in one area but really good in character skills is not the reason why your character skills will help you. It is more likely that character skills help you when your cognitive skills are also pretty decent. Again, in both cases, we're making certain assumptions, but as far as I can see, option 5 does not answer the why, and that is why I would eliminate it. So, option 1 is finally the correct choice. Difficult question, may or may not have answered it in the text, but as you can see, greater support for 1 as compared to the rest, and that is why we choose the first option.